Stubbs, a specialist physiotherapist and the founder of the pelvic power movement. Today I'd like to talk about the basics of the pelvic floor. What is it? Where is it? How does it work? And how can you find it? So let's look at the pelvic floor. For many women, finding their pelvic floor is a real problem because they've never actually taken the time to have a good look downstairs and see what it's all about. Female anatomy is somewhat hidden, whereas male anatomy is on show. And I always say that men could probably pick their penis up in a lineup, but could you find your vulva? Probably not. So let's have a look what is downstairs. So today I've got a pelvic model with me. This is the pelvis. So the white aspects are the bones. So these are your crests, your pelvic crests. Here you've got your pubic bone at the front. At the back we've got our sacrum, which feeds into the coccyx. The red areas are your muscles. So most importantly, we're looking mainly at two parts of the pelvic floor, which is this bowl-like muscle here, which you can see. You can also see it from this aspect, and it's lots of layers. And this we'll describe as your levator ani, and that is a large pelvic floor muscle that provides that lift when maybe a pelvic floor therapist has asked you to lift. And then we have this figure of 8 muscle here, there where you can see your anus, your vagina and your urethra. And this area is the muscle that closes the sphincters. If we look a little bit closer now, so what you'll see on the external aspect, say if you were to take a mirror and have a look at your nether regions, you would be able to see your anus at the back there. You'd also be able to see your labia. So the external parts of what we know as the vagina are actually called the vulva. And they incorporate your labial lips, and you'll be able to see your clitoris there underneath the hood and your urethra. Okay, and the vagina is just the canal that leads from the external surface up towards the uterus. So that is a brief anatomy lesson. The pelvic floor has a couple of main jobs. It supports your pelvic organs, so your pelvic organs being your uterus, your bladder and your bowels. And it keeps you continent, so prevents you from weeing or pooing yourself at unexpected moments. Quite convenient really. And while we say it only has these two jobs, actually the pelvic floor is responsible for lots of different movements, and it is involved in everything we do, from shopping to cooking to breathing to laughing to sneezing. Every action for a female has an impact on the pelvic floor. So if we have a problem in another area of our body, for instance, or we have a problem in our pelvic floor, we are going to notice it because there is that connection, because of the position it has in the body, the base, the core, the center of your being. With every movement, with every breath, we have a connection to the pelvic floor, which is why the pelvis and the pelvic floor is so important. So what problems do we generally experience with pelvis and pelvic floor? Well, most commonly people think about incontinence and prolapse, but we also can have problems such as tight pelvic floors and pelvic pain. Many women experience problems with their pelvic floor, usually postpartum after giving birth, and some do experience it during pregnancy. But as we are aging, we are an aging population, women are experiencing more problems than they did previously. And this is because, for many reasons, we are exercising more as a nation, but then at the same time we are sitting at a desk for longer periods than we may have done earlier. We're also having babies later on in life, which means that our body isn't quite as resilient, doesn't bounce back quite in the same way. With us living longer and being more active, more women going through the menopause are experiencing more pelvic floor problems. A reduction in estrogen can bring with it a whole host of issues such as vaginal dryness, prolapse issues, incontinence issues. So it's really important that if you are experiencing any pelvic health issues, you do go and seek professional medical advice. Postpartum, we generally see women who have had traumatic childbirth, but many women do also experience incontinence after childbirth. Remember, it does take a little while for your body to bounce back, especially if you're breastfeeding. That slight reduction in estrogen can delay things a little bit. Be patient with your body, nourish it, feed it, allow it to rest. I would advise, if you are an active individual and you'd love to go back to exercise, wait at least until your 6-week check and do see a pelvic health therapist for a pelvic check. Especially with dynamic and impactful exercises such as running, it's important that our pelvis is strong and fit for purpose. This can prevent a myriad of problems further down the line. So incontinence can happen, like I said, at many stages, and there's many different types of incontinence. So postpartum, there's often frequency and urgency, maybe some stress incontinence. With a tight pelvic floor, we can experience similar symptoms as with a menopausal pelvic floor. So it's really important that you seek professional help to make sure that your specific issue is diagnosed correctly and you can start appropriate treatment. There's lots of information in the media about a weak pelvic floor. Do your Kegels, make sure you're constantly squeezing. But for many women, a tight pelvic floor can be equally as problematic. A tight pelvic floor means the muscles of the pelvis are constantly contracted. Imagine our bicep was constantly contracted. It's going to be very painful when you go to release it. If you're experiencing problems having sex, pain removing a tampon, pelvic pain in general, then a tight pelvic floor could be an issue for you. A pelvic therapist is able to diagnose this for you and advise you on a treatment plan. Like we said about Kegels, it's equally as important to know how to contract your pelvic floor as it is to release your pelvic floor. We couldn't walk around with a bicep fully contracted. Equally, we wouldn't want to have one that's also always lengthened. A fully functional pelvic floor should be able to release and contract throughout the range of movement and be strong throughout that range of movement. So it's very important when considering a pelvic rehab program that we are looking at strength through that range of movement to make sure that your organs and your body are fully supported. Let's talk about how we can find, or specifically how can you find your pelvic floor. Sometimes if we've had a traumatic birth, or we've just given birth to a child, or we've had any other trauma within our pelvis, we lose that connection from the brain to the pelvis. And sometimes when we're asked to strengthen our pelvic floor or do pelvic floor exercises, we can find this difficult. We're not quite sure how we are squeezing. Are we doing it correctly? Are we making things worse? So let's run through a couple of ideas for you to experiment to see if you can find your pelvic floor. So when a therapist asks you to squeeze your pelvic floor, what they're looking for is that this muscle underneath here, this nice figure of 8 muscle, can squeeze and the levator ani can lift. So it feels like a squeeze and a lift. There's two components to that movement. Trying to locate that squeeze and that lift sometimes can be tricky if we've had trauma there. So I wouldn't recommend doing this regularly, but if you're really struggling to connect to your pelvic floor, stopping the urine from flowing when you're urinating is a good start. Now you shouldn't, as I said, do this on a regular basis because we don't want to cause any dysfunction. When we sit on the toilet, the idea is that we release the pelvis and we allow the urine to flow. But if you're really struggling, then it's a good place to start. Just do it once or twice on the toilet and see if you can stop that flow of urine. Once you have that sensation, then we can use that later on to do pelvic floor exercises. Another way to see if we can locate those muscles is to sit on a hard surface, so maybe a kitchen chair or a stool, What you want is a nice hard surface pushing on your perineum. And your perineum specifically is that area between the vagina and the anus. And it's the part of your pelvic floor, that really is most external, and when you sit will touch surfaces. So you can do that, like I said, on a hard chair or on the arm of a sofa and really get that pressure. This pressure is going to give you some proprioceptive feedback and make the experience more neurologically stimulating. I'm then going to ask you to imagine that you are trying to prevent yourself from passing wind. So we're going to squeeze around the anus, and then we're going to lift and squeeze and prevent ourselves from urinating. So we're going to get that squeeze around the anus and the urethra and the lift. Now it's really important that after you've squeezed and lifted, you notice that you are able to relax. So we're going to squeeze and lift and then release. And like I said, it's very important that you also note the release, because for many people, squeezing can be equally as difficult as releasing. And this is where we come to other problems like tight pelvic floors. It's really great to practice those exercises in lots of different positions, because for many people, sitting down is not the ideal and optimum place. They may get more sensation maybe in kneeling, lying on their back, or on all fours. So please do experiment with lots of different positions. See how your body reacts. If you're having a problem initiating the squeeze and the lift, and you really don't feel that you are doing these correctly, then I would definitely recommend going to see a pelvic health therapist. They can help do an investigation and an examination to see what's going on with your pelvic floor and give you the right guidance so that you aren't wasting your time or making your symptoms worse. I hope you'll share the information far and wide. Pelvic health is a human right. Together we can make a difference and change lives.